Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good day. You are tuning to special interview. This is a radio program by Institute of Islamic Understanding Malaysia, IKIM. And this program is an English talk show where experts and leaders from various fields share their professional insights and opinions on current and groundbreaking issues that foster innovative perspectives and solutions. I'm your host, Patricia Afrina, and in this episode, this time, we will look at the topic transforming Islamic leadership, the method of Cambridge Muslim College. And if you look at it, at a time when the global Muslim community faces a host of challenges, for example, like identity crisis, the reconciliation of faith, and also with modern ideologies and pressing global issues, for example, like climate change. So the need for capable and also visionary leaders has never been greater, and Cambridge Muslim College, founded by Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad, is a groundbreaking institution that addresses these needs. So by integrating traditional Islamic sciences and also with contemporary disciplines, for example, like philosophy and also psychology, it can equip new generation of leaders to serve their communities with wisdom and compassion. So what inspired the founding of this institution, and how does it address modern challenges while staying rooted in tradition? And what does the future hold for Islamic leadership in an increasingly complex world? So I have here with me is Dr. Timothy Winter of Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad in the studio. Assalamualaikum, Shaykh.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
It is such a pleasure to have you, Shaykh, in our studio today, Shaykh. So, Shaykh, in the previous episode, right, we talked about the rise of Western intelligentsia, and you share about how does Islam can offer solutions to the modern problems, for example. And in this episode, we will look specifically through the perspective of leadership. How can we give birth, or how can we shape the future leader that can inspire and also can bring success, I would say, bring success to the future of Muslim Ummah itself. So as a starting for today's conversation, I would like to start with you. What inspired you to establish this institution, and how does it differ from any other institution?
Well, thank you for the question. I've been living in Cambridge, I suppose, for over half of my life now.
Wow.
I consider it my home. Cambridge, of course, represents a complex skyline or an archipelago of different institutions, some of them very ancient, some of them quite recent, some of them secular, but some of them religious. It's one of the great hubs for change, for innovation, but also for tradition, religiously as well as secularly in today's world. The city of Newton and Darwin, of Crick and Watson, of Stephen Hawking, but also of a range of significant religious thinkers. So it occurred to me that it would be quite timely to add to that skyline of different institutions, some of them seminaries, something that was specifically geared for the interests and for the training of the Muslim community. Given that the Muslim community is becoming larger and more significant, we are, according to the last census of 3 years ago, 6.9% of the UK resident population, but our numbers increased by 40% every year.
Wow.
Which means that in many British cities, Islam is actually the most active and the dominant religion. There are more Muslims going to Friday prayers in England every week now than there are Church of England members going to Sunday church. So we're described as a minority, but from a certain perspective, we're not quite a minority any longer. But of course, many winds are blowing. There are nativist movements. There is a far right, not just in Europe, but in England as well, anti-immigration sentiment that morphs quite readily into forms of racism or disguised racism in the form of anti-Muslim prejudice. And it's therefore necessary that this growing, in many ways very successful community, has to have a leadership that can explain and defend it. In terms of the media, in terms of politics, in terms of leaders of industry, in terms of religious leaders. And at the moment, most of our ulama, most of our leaders, although they are more or less competent now in the English language, are not really culturally competent to understand the subtleties of various debates. What we need is the alim who can emerge from his mosque when there's some national emergency, and Sky News push a microphone in his face, and he has 5 seconds either to improve 10 million people's perception of the Muslim community or to do a lot of damage. It's a position of considerable responsibility.
Yes.
And of course, dealing with the media is something that even very trained politicians sometimes get wrong. So the idea is to have 2 main programs. One of them is a program which is an intensive 1-year reconfiguration of the skill set of trained imams and ulama and ustads who've been to madrasas in Britain or abroad and have done maybe 8 or even 12 years of Islamic studies. They're hafiz and they have the traditional accoutrements of learning, but they don't really understand the British environment which they inhabit. If they're asked questions about the singularity or climate change or gender fluidity or nanotechnology or AI or any of the current hot button issues, they can't cope very well, which is not just bad in the da'wah context, but also bad in terms of the younger generation of educated British Muslims who want to go to the imam of the mosque or listen to a khutbah or go to the Muslim chaplain and hear things that actually make sense. And I found that in other parts of the Muslim world as well, there are plenty of young people who want to have a positive relationship with their religious heritage, but who find the existing religious leadership somewhat out of touch, sometimes dangerously so. So we take the most promising young ulama and we reconfigure them by giving them the best of Cambridge's human resources. So the rabbi comes and tells them about Judaism, the former Archbishop of Canterbury comes and tells them about C.S. Lewis, the particle physicists come and tell them about quantum mechanics, and they hear the best people in the world telling them, and they're generally very grateful for this. And by the time they graduate, and it's quite a small program, we have about 15 students, girls as well as boys on that program, they become far more competent to lead communities and much more confident in themselves because they understand the strengths and the weaknesses and the nature of the challenges of modernity. We also have a BA program, which is an accredited 3-year program in fairly classical Islamic studies. So there's tafsir, there's fiqh, there's Quran, hadith, Arabic grammar, and those things which you have to have if you're going to be a thought leader in the Muslim world. But at the same time, we teach those things with an awareness of certain contemporary methods of teaching them. So hadith, fiqh, all of the disciplines have to be taught in terms of the historic evolution of those disciplines and the context in which their formulation took place. And also, for instance, when we teach logic, we teach them contemporary logic as well as classical Islamic, Qurtubi style mantiq.
Mixture.
It's not it's kind of, we teach both of them and we offer them certain thoughts on how they can interact and perhaps benefit from each other. Because the Islamic world at its most dynamic has been very hospitable of thoughts coming from elsewhere. The strength and the power of Islamic theology comes from its willingness selectively to appropriate things like Greek logic, for instance, and to reject certain other things which were regarded as monotheistically incompatible. So it's a little bit like what the great scholars were doing in the 9th, 10th century in Baghdad in terms of looking at other heritages and seeing what we can learn from them in order to strengthen ourselves and to strengthen our suit of armour so that we can go more confidently into the modern intellectual battlefield.
So it's not just limited to the study of traditional Islamic studies. So also you integrate it with, I would say, contemporary ideology of understanding.
Ideologies, but without giving them a single solution as to how they deal with these issues. It's quite contemporary in the sense that we simply expose them to the debates, but we don't tell them what the Islamic conclusion ought to be. What is the Islamic view on AI, for instance? Well, the ulama have a million different views. What is the Islamic view on genetic manipulation and all of these things, end-of-life care, brain death? These are fatwa wars. And so we're not going to tell them this is the correct position. With all of our education, we say this is the classical Islamic tradition in its diversity. And this is modernity in its diversity. It's fun to see how they clash or don't clash or can talk to each other. So it's a kind of contemporary education, but we think that it also continues the pre-modern insistence on the absence of closure. You know, if you go to a fully traditional madrasa, they will say it's fine to have a variety of opinions on this particular fatwa issue. If you go to some fundamentalist institutions, they say, no, there's only one view and everybody else has to be killed or something. That's a big crisis in a lot of modern Muslim countries, and some countries are even breaking down politically as a result of this, the kind of totalitarian view of the fundamentalist against the more inclusive view of the traditional orthodox scholars. So we try to incline to the side of traditional orthodoxy and to be hospitable to a range of opinions.
And it seems like it is encouraging us, I would say, an environment of debate. It is celebrated. And I had this conversation before with one of the, I would say, the former Minister of Education of Malaysia about the thin line between the freedom of speech and also the debate, having discussion, I would say, because when you debate, right, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are trying to prove yourself that you're right or you're a bad person. However, looking at it in the university students nowadays, it seems that there's a decline of, I would say, this activity of engaging in debate. So from you yourself as a university professor, where do you see our university students nowadays? Do you think that they are being resilient enough, or actually there's a decline of it, especially in the modern society?
Well, I can't really comment on the Malaysian situation or that of any other Muslim country. I've only been here for 4 days, and I don't think that my fatwa on Islam in Malaysia is going to be very decisive. I can only speak to our situation in our sort of 4 million or so British Muslim environment. I would say it's complicated, that there are plenty of young people who do read a lot of books, who are able to put the phone down and pick up the book, which is a big step for a lot of young people, and who get the bug of being fascinated by ideas and really loving history. And so we find that quite a few of our students, once they graduate, continue in an academic track. They don't go on to become muftis or imams of mosques. Some of them do.
Yes.
Some of them say, I'd really want to do, for instance, last year we had 2 students who were accepted to do a master's in philosophy at King's College in London, which is one of the best philosophy schools in the world.
Yes.
And inshallah, some of them will progress into the PhD realm and actually become thought leaders rather than just people who kind of speak rather loudly from the minbar. So we need to train those elite thinkers, because once you have them, then they write the books that influence the journalists, the novelists, the politicians, everybody else, in a way that those who speak loudly on the minbar generally can't. So we're quite elitist. We're looking to replace the Muslim voice at the top echelons of our community. It's not mass education at all. We're very selective.
And still talking about the student resilience, we know that university students have always faced challenges, but today's issues, for example, like identity crisis and also the struggle to balance traditional values and modern ideologies are particularly complex. So how does Cambridge Muslim College support these students in navigating between these challenges, particularly when it comes to reconciling with personal beliefs with the realities of the modern world?
Well, to have an identity crisis is a rather bad basis for starting a religious life. People don't practice religion because they want to feel part of something or to be something or to discover themselves. They should practice religion because they want to draw closer to God, and that's the only legitimate reason. Very often religion is used in order to create political dividing lines, to appeal to people's anxiety about the loss of their own narrative in order to get them to vote a particular way. I don't think that that's Islamically legitimate. There's only one reason to practice religion, which is that you have faith in God and His messenger.
Yes.
Everything else is almost idolatrous, really. There's just one qibla. So in that context, it does raise the interesting question of what a British Muslim identity should look like. What we're seeing is that the majority of British Muslims now were born in Britain. The first wave of new Commonwealth immigration came to an end really in the 1960s, early 1970s. And it's the new generation that is starting to feel what it is. And actually, statistically, very interesting, you find that very often they are involved in regional politics. So you saw that the First Minister of Scotland was actually a Muslim.
Yes.
And very many Muslims vote for the Scottish National Party and feel very intensely Scottish. They speak with a Scottish accent and they like Scottish food. And so it's interesting that Muslims tend to become much more patriotic, if you like, and identify themselves with British localities than the majority population. A higher proportion of Muslims in England say that they're British than of non-Muslim communities, for instance. So in terms of integration and a sense of putting down roots, community seems to be doing pretty well. The difficult question is how that articulates itself religiously in terms of fiqh, in terms of theology. What is the theological context or legitimation for Islamic inculturation? But historically, Islam has been, as one of the ulama said, like pure water that flows over rocks of different colours and takes the colour of those rocks. So the Islam of the Malay region, the Nusantara, has a different cultural feel to that of the Arab world, to West Africa. Obviously, people here are not going to take their Islam from the Middle East or from England or from anywhere else. They have their own traditions, their own way of doing the adhan, their own way of reciting Quran. As long as these things are compatible with Islamic guidelines, it's important that they maintain their identity.
Yes.
Particularly now when the Middle East is kind of imploding, you don't really want to look at that as some kind of role model at all. We have similar, because you're at the opposite end of the Eurasian landmass to ourselves. You're kind of at the bottom right-hand corner, we're at the top left-hand corner. But we face the same question of how we inculturate in order to enable our Islam to enhance our sense of belongingness to the soil, to the environment, to the local narrative. And that is work in progress, but the British Muslim tradition, since the time of somebody called Abdal Hakim, who founded the first active mosque in England in 1889 in Liverpool, and his community, has been quite distinctive in its insistence on the evolution of a particularly British flavour to an Islamic identity in terms of mosque design, in terms of aesthetics, in terms of forms of dress, and other outward manifestations of that inward disposition of the soul. Very interesting process. But it's important, if we're to push back against the far right, the anti-immigration people who say Muslims will always be foreigners, if we can show that actually Muslims are really embedded in the local culture and they appreciate it even more than their contemporaries, we've won a great victory. So, for instance, Muslims respond to Shakespeare far better and more deeply than do most secular people in Britain.
For real?
Because Shakespeare has all of the classical virtues of honour and vengeance and faith and the supernatural and the family and those quintessential human virtues. They're in Shakespeare. But the contemporary people who get their very loose egotistic values from Hollywood don't relate to that any longer. They look at Richard II and they look at Hamlet and they look at Romeo and Juliet and they can't understand anything about the meaning of virtue, the meaning of womanhood, the meaning of manhood, the meaning of heroism. Shakespeare is all about those archetypes. So if we can demonstrate that we're actually more responsive to our national literature, for instance, than most secular people, we've won a very important discursive cultural battle.
So just shortly before we go to the last question, you mentioned about the number of your students, right? Including men and women, around 15 students, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned just now, the numbers. So I'd like to touch a bit about women in leadership. So there's a growing emphasis, especially in modern world, about how can we encourage more women in leadership roles. So yet many feel that feel constrained by societal structures that often described as patriarchal. So from an Islamic perspective, what is the role of women in leadership and where do you think we stand today in terms of empowering women within our communities?
Well, I think the whole world is confused about this. Our Prime Minister in Westminster was asked recently, what is a woman? And he collapsed and couldn't define it. So the West is now no kind of exemplar for how to deal with gender because it's all melting down into millions of fluidities. Similarly, the contemporary insistence that women have to be 50% of the workforce at all levels, which is a very strange and primitive way of defining what constitutes justice, is having to account for the fact that the birth rate is collapsing across the developed world. And countries which have really insisted on pushing women very intensely from an early age into high-pressure careers, like South Korea, for instance, are now finding that the birth rate is tanking to an extent that will make the country economically collapse within a generation. So we're finding that very many educated women in the West, you can look at Pearl Davis, for instance, in the United States, in a post-feminist space, and are emphasizing that female fulfillment cannot ignore the biological nature of themselves and the different temperament of the male and the female, the male with the testosterone, which makes him competitive and pushy, slightly aggressive in ways that equip him for leadership, that to say that that is a reality is not to say that they are unequal. It is just to say that both genders will be happier and more fulfilled if, in an unconstrained way, they naturally gravitate towards external and internal forms in the human reality. Of course, the modern turbo-capitalism wants everybody to be working too hard, because then we pay more taxes and we produce more products. So the feminist thing has been very much pushed by the capitalistic structures. But whether that's actually good for people, we have a mental health pandemic amongst young people and amongst young women in Britain at the moment. And that cannot be separated from, the reality of this very unnatural insistence that 50% of footballers, 50% of jet pilots, 50% have to be women, otherwise it's not just. I think that's not fair to women, and it's good to see that very many women now in the West are pushing back against that and are looking for not necessarily replication of pre-modern traditional roles, but at least for a more tolerant environment where women can be respected when they choose to perform maternal and wifely functions rather than just winning the Grand Prix or whatever it is that the capitalists would like them to be doing.
And as we are reaching the end of this conversation, I would like to ask for your own view. Where do you foresee the future of Cambridge Muslim College in the next 10 years?
Well, of course, much is dependent upon funding because we're not supported by any government or any agency. We're a charity and we struggle somewhat. We have the curriculum now, we have the teaching staff, we have 5 researchers as well, and we have our own campus in central Cambridge, which bids fair to place us at the forefront of Islamic studies in modern Britain. Already we're I think we're the largest Islamic studies hub in the British university landscape at the moment already. We're hoping to increase the number of undergraduate students. We might introduce a master's program. But in particular, I think we want to develop further the research wing, because without deep, committed, full-time thinking about contemporary challenges and the nature of the tradition, everything just becomes teaching the students again every year, and you don't really expand the capacities of teaching, and you don't really contribute to the global debate and the debate in the Muslim world about some of the key issues that we're interested in.
And I'd just like to share one key take I can take from today's discussion about the importance of Islam places on leadership. So for example, like in Surah An-Nisa verse 59, Allah says, "O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the messenger and those with authority among you, and if you differ in anything, then refer it back to Allah and the messenger. If you believe in Allah and the last day, that is better and most proper for final determination." And this verse highlights the need to follow those in positions of leadership, and this underscoring that leaders must be just and responsible towards their followers. And as Muslims, it is crucial for us to reflect on this and seek ways to transform. How can we educate and nurture better future Islamic leaders to ensure that they are equipped with the values and skills necessary to uphold justice and fulfill their responsibilities? And with that being said, I would like to thank Shaykh Abdal Hakim Murad for his insights on today's conversation. Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
And dear listeners, if you'd like to share your comment or also to share your thoughts on today's conversation, you can leave it on the comment section of this editing. So be sure to tune in to us next week for more conversation. Stay tuned to IKIM FM, inspirasi utama anda.